Gopi Chandra Vallabha Giri Varadhari Gopi Chandra Jaya Gopi Chandra Vallabha Giri Varadhari Gopi Yashodanandana Bhajadanandana Yashodanandana Bhajadanandana Jamunatira Vanachari Jamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Chandra Vallabha Giri Varadhari Jaya Gopi Chandra Vallabha Giri Varadhari Yashodanandana Bhajadanandana Yashodanandana Yamunatira Vanachari Jamunatira Vanachari Jaya John Vishnupad Paramahansa, Parivrajikacharya, Ashtottara Shatta Sri Srimad, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta, Swami Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada Ki. John Vishnupad Paramahansa, Parivrajikacharya, Ashtottara Shatta Sri Srimad, Bhakti Siddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, Goswami Maharaj, Prabhupada Ki. Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki. Janita Gaur Premanande. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 4th Canto, Chapter 13, Description of the Descendants of Dhruva Maharaj. And today it's text number 28. Na vidameha devanang helanang vayam anvapi yanna grinanti bhagan swan ye deva kama sakshinaha na vidameha devanang helanang vayam anvapi yan nagrinanti bhagan swan ye deva kama sakshinaha na vidameha devanang helanang vayam anvapi yan nagrinanti bhagan swan ye deva kama sakshinaha na vidameha devanang Helanang vayaman vapi. Yanna grinanti bhagan swan. Ye deva kama sakshinaha. Navidameha devanam. Helanang vayaman vapi. Yanna grinanti bhagan swan. Ye deva kama sakshinaha. Navidameha devanam. Helanang vayaman vapi. Yannigrananti bhagan swan. Ye deva kama sakshinaha. Word for word, please repeat. Na, not. Vidama, can find. Iha, in this connection. Devanam, of the demigods. Helanam, insult, neglect. Vayam, we. Anu, minute. Pi, even. Yat, because of which. Na, not. Grinanti, except. Bhagan, shares. Swan, own. Yea, who. Deva, the demigods. Karma Sakshina, witnesses for the sacrifice. Translation. Just a bit of background first, actually. So we're just hearing all these different people, a list of names, so to speak, of descendants of Dhruva Maharaj in this chapter. Maybe all of you here are familiar with this, but I wasn't, so I had to read a bit through it yesterday. And as we were going through this list of names of descendants of Dhruva Maharaj, Maitreya got to King Anga and mentioned how King Anga had a son, Vena, and there was problems, and Vena was killed by Brahmanas, and Vidura's like, well, hang on, what's going on here? Kings aren't usually killed by Brahmanas. Was Vena really that bad? Can you tell me about Vena? So this is the narration of the history of King Vena and also of King Anga. So we're at the beginning with King Anga. He's just performed an Ashvamedha sacrifice. That's the beginning of the story. But something's not going quite right. The demigods aren't turning up for their offerings. They've been offered clarified butter, but the demigods aren't accepting it. So today's text is just after this realization, and the Brahmanas are explaining to King Anga why this is happening, why the demigods aren't accepting the sacrifices. So the translation says, "Dear King, we do not find any reason that the demigods should feel insulted or neglected in any way. But still the demigods who are witnesses for the sacrifice do not accept their shares. We do not know why this is so." In other words, why aren't the demigods here? I mean, everything's being done properly, but still the demigods aren't turning up for their shares of the sacrifice. So Srila Prabhupada's purport. It is indicated herein that if there is negligence on the part of the priest, the demigods do not accept their share in sacrifices. Similarly, in devotional service, there are offenses known as seva aparad. Those who are engaged in worshipping the deity, Radha and Krishna, in the temple should avoid such offenses in service. The offenses in service are described in the Nectar of Devotion. If we simply make a show of offering services to the deity, but do not care for the seva aparad, certainly the Radha Krishna deity will not accept offerings from such non-devotees. Devotees engaged in temple worship should therefore not manufacture their own methods, but should strictly follow the regulative principles of cleanliness, and then offerings will be accepted. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Jnanatamrandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Translation again, dear King, we do not find any reason that the demigods should feel insulted or neglected in any way. But still, the demigods, who are witnesses for the sacrifice, do not accept their shares. We do not know why this is so. I recently listened to a series of 3 classes by His Grace Radhika Raman Prabhu, and the topic was giving talks about Krishna to various different audiences. Today I'm going to try to implement some of those things that I heard from that talk. It's a very, very wonderful talk series. I recommend anyone who hasn't seen or heard them already to check them out. Radhika Raman Prabhu, 2022 talks in ISKCON Silicon Valley. Very, very wonderful talks. The reason I bring that up is because one of the things he mentions in that is that it's best to follow the purport in giving the class. So Srila Prabhupada, he has a certain angle that he's taking here in the purport. And when I read the text, I wasn't thinking of that angle. And then when I read the purport, I was thinking, yeah, I can give class on that. That's what Prabhupada's speaking on. So that's what we will do. That's the proper process. So Prabhupada, he very quickly, he says, it is indicated herein that if there is negligence on the part of the priest, the demigods do not accept their share of the sacrifices. Okay, so that's what the text is saying. And then immediately Prabhupada changes gears. He says, similarly, in devotional service, there are offenses known as seva aparad, and that's the rest of the purport. So the text says one thing, and Prabhupada acknowledges that, but the rest of the purport, he focuses on offenses in deity worship, which it's relevant, it's related to the topic, because we are focusing on worshipping Krishna, not on worshipping the demigods. And so Prabhupada's making that very clear in the purport here. He acknowledges, yes, there are demigods, but let's talk about Krishna. So I read this and I thought, this reminds me of Bhagavad Gita chapter 17, the faith in the different modes of material nature. Sacrifices performed in the mode of goodness, they're done out of duty, done at the proper time and proper place, and they're not, that person who's performing that sacrifice isn't expecting anything from it. So King Anga, he's following this process, he's doing it properly. Whereas on the flip side, a sacrifice in the mode of ignorance, it's done without care of rules and regulations, without remunerations to the priests, without distribution of prasadam, without proper chanting of Vedic hymns. So that's not happening. It's not a tamasic sacrifice. It's being done properly. But still the demigods aren't coming. So why is this? But that's not the topic of the class today, because that's not what Prabhupada wants to focus on. So Prabhupada says that similarly, there are offenses in devotional service. So for us, instead of why aren't the demigods coming, it's why isn't Krishna accepting my offerings? What's going on here? What are the problems? Prabhupada mentions there are offenses known as seva aparad. So somehow or other, we're doing something that's not proper, and that's why an offering to Krishna isn't being accepted. Or another simple example, we have no taste for the holy name, it feels real dry, and that's because there are 10 offenses to the holy name, and we're probably committing one of those offenses in some way, shape, or form, which is why it's feeling like a drag. Prabhupada focuses on the nectar of devotion in this purport. He doesn't quote a whole chunk of it, but he very simply says the offenses in service are described in the nectar of devotion. And I just went through the nectar of devotion and I thought, okay, which section is Prabhupada talking about here? And chapter 6 here is entitled How to Discharge Devotional Service. So we get a whole bunch of list of rules and regulations how to do devotional service. And then the next chapter, chapter 7, is entitled Evidence Regarding Devotional Principles. So you may, okay, this is what we do, but then one may ask, well, why am I doing it? So there's so much quotes from so many different shastras by Rupa Goswami as to why we're doing it, what the authority, the activities we're doing are based on. And then immediately after that chapter, so we've got the how to do the devotional service, then the why, and then the next chapter is entitled Offenses to be Avoided, What Not to Do. So we may know what we should do and why we're doing it, but still we may make some mistakes. So we hear what we have to avoid at the same time. And then there's 4 more chapters after that, chapters 9, 10, 11, and 12. And they're all more or less more details from Shastra supporting how we do devotional service and why we do the various activities. So there's a lot of information there in the Nectar of Devotion. And of course, a lot of these principles mentioned are related to deity worship. There's a lot of detail in deity worship. And actually, Prabhupada was quoted as saying that this is what His Holiness Deva Mrita Maharaj often explains, is that Prabhupada said that if he was to give us all the rules and regulations for deity worship, like the whole shebang, not just what's in Nectar of Devotion, but everything, he said we'd faint. It would be too much for us to compute. And then after all those chapters, which I've just mentioned, there's chapter 13, which is entitled 5 Potent Forms of Devotional Service. And one, of course, of which is deity worship. And many of you may know this next point that I'm going to quote, but if you don't, it's a very, very handy one to remember. Acronyms are easy ways to remember things. And this is one of the easiest ones I've ever heard. And it's awesome because it's so easy to remember the 5 potent limbs of devotional service. And it goes like this: A, B, C, D, D. So we all should know our A, B, C, D, Ds. And so the 5 letters. A stands for association, associating with devotees. B stands for Bhagavatam, hearing and chanting Srimad Bhagavatam, attending Bhagavatam class. C stands for chanting, the Yuga Dharma, chanting the holy name of the Lord. D stands for deity, deity worship, but there's 2 Ds. The other D stands for Dham, residing in the holy Dham, making a pilgrimage to the holy places. Now, getting back to the topic of aparads, there's so many different types of aparads. There's Seva aparad, offenses in our devotional service. Vaishnava aparad, offenses to devotees. Even worse than that, Guru aparad, offending one's spiritual master. Jiva aparad, offenses to living entities. When we're out there in the world, all species of life, as Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita, are his children. Nama parad, we're very familiar with that. We recite the 10 offenses to the holy name every morning. And there's also Dharma parad, offenses in the holy Dham to be avoided. And I'm sure there's others, but this is just the ones that immediately came to mind. And the word aparad, it's a combination of 2 words. Radha, as we know, she is the topmost servitor of the Lord. So in this word aparad, Radha means worship, devotion, and love. And apa means something that is contrary to. So an aparad is something totally the opposite of what we should be doing, basically. And there's other ways of breaking down the aparads. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he classifies them as 4 types: Nam aparad, Seva aparad, Vaishnava aparad, and Jiva aparad. And then Jiva Goswami himself, he breaks it down in one way into 2, just Nam aparad and Seva aparad. But however you classify them or categorize them, they all ultimately include everything. For example, the offenses to the holy name that we recite every morning if we're in the temple. We don't recite them every morning here. We have a slightly different program, but we still should know them. And that list of offenses, the first offense to the holy name is Vaishnava aparad, blaspheming the devotees. And the third offense is Guru aparad, disobeying the spiritual master. And then there's also blaspheming the Vedic literatures, Shastra aparad. So even in just the list of Nam aparad, the offenses to the holy name, you've got all the aparads to pretty much everything else contained within that. So even if we just learn that list of 10 offenses to the holy name, then we're pretty much covered. And the next thing that I thought of in relation to this topic of Krishna accepting offerings was the classic verse from Bhagavad Gita, Patram Pushpam Palam Toyam, Yome Bhakteya Prayachchati. Krishna explains that if something is offered with love and devotion, he accepts it. But Prabhupada makes the point in the purport that Krishna states what he likes. And he says, quote, "We cannot be acting on the level of loving devotion if we offer such foods as meat, fish, or eggs." So yes, love is the main thing that Krishna accepts. As the example was given in Shastra, Vidura offered Krishna a banana peel, and Krishna ate it with great ecstasy because it was offered by his devotee with love. But Vidura didn't offer him a fishbone, you know. So maybe he was a little bit off. He didn't give him the banana pulp. He gave him the banana peel. But that's okay. The love was there, and it was still within the category of a fruit. But the main point being is that Krishna is a person, and he has likes and dislikes. And to develop our relationship with him, we need to find out what he wants and also what he doesn't want, and when he wants it and how he likes it. And an example of this could be arati. There are many aratis performed in deity worship, and they're performed at specific times of the day, and certain items are used. It's not whimsical. So this is what Krishna likes. This is given to us by the previous acharyas. They know when Krishna wants the aratis to be performed and what items he likes to be offered. So the whole process is nicely passed down through the parampara. In this particular purport, Prabhupada focuses on cleanliness at the end. He says, devotees engaged in temple worship should therefore not manufacture their own methods, but should strictly follow the regulative principles of cleanliness, and then offerings will be accepted. So it's interesting how he's stressing this point of cleanliness. And I've heard His Holiness Devi Swami state, quoting Srila Prabhupada, 2 very prominent items in deity worship are cleanliness and punctuality. You could say that's the essence of deity worship. Everything should be clean and pure, and it should be on time. And if we look at the list of offenses in deity worship, and the do's and the don'ts, in the list of nectar of devotion, we find that many of them are to do with cleanliness or purity. And I thought about this, and I thought, well, to an everyday person who's maybe not practicing Krishna consciousness, they think, okay, I know how to be clean and tidy, no problem. And it's true. My mom's kitchen, it's very clean and tidy, very organized. But unfortunately, it's not pure because all sorts of non-vegetarian cooking happens in that kitchen. So for Westerners, the concept of tidiness and cleanliness is familiar, but this idea of purity is a new concept to many of us. Maybe for some of you here too. I'm not sure of all of your backgrounds, but definitely this idea of purity was definitely something that I wasn't so familiar with. So for example, it's mentioned that one should not enter the temple in a contaminated state. If someone in your family has died, you have to wait a certain period until you can enter the temple again. And for many, that may be quite a long time. The minimum period is 12 and the maximum is 30 days. In the Nectar of Devotion, these periods are mentioned. And so one can be thinking, well, okay, well, I mean, you know, it's been 5 days. I'm clean. You know, I've had my shower, put on some clean clothes. I cried for 3 days. You know, the fact that I lost my brother or my mother or whoever it was. Why can't I come to the temple now? And I heard Vaisheshika Prabhu mention a very interesting point in this regard. He explained that because we're so attached, we may not be so conscious of it, but because we're so deeply attached in the bodily concept of life, so if we lose someone who's close to us like a family member, our mind is very unsteady for quite a long time after the person has passed away. And we can be absent-minded, may not be able to focus properly on our service. So that's why it's recommended that one should not visit the temple during that period, because one may still be disturbed in mind to some extent, or even one may be going through their day and everything seems okay, and then something, somehow or other, someone mentions to you something that reminds you of your lost relative, and then immediately, oh, you're lamenting again. So that's considered a contaminated condition, so one should not visit the temple during this period. Or another classic one, one should not offer foodstuffs to the deity which has been seen by dogs or lower animals. So again, a Kali Yuga mindset can think, why are you being so fanatical? Like, it's the dog's over there, the food's over here. Sure, it's sore. What's the problem, you know? But these subtle things, these items involved in deity worship, this purity, we have to accept Shastra on this point. We don't concoct and think, oh yeah, I know what's pure and what's impure. Basically, we're saying we're God when we do that. We're saying my mind and senses know what is what. Shastra, who are you, Shastra? I know that you're the literary representation of God, but I know what I'm doing. So we shouldn't have that kind of mentality. We follow Shastra. It's the authorized vision. And his Grace Radhika Raman Prabhu was also mentioning this in his talk on how to give a class. He was mentioning that when sharing realizations, we can only basically, properly speaking, share things that are based on Shastra. So we may have a personal experience, but it has to connect to a Shastric point. It has to be grounded in Shastra. Otherwise, it can just be your own concoction. Basically, it may seem practical and real to you, but unless it's founded and rooted in Shastra, then someone else on the other side of the room can say, well, my realization is something different. And fair enough, because if neither of you are speaking based on Shastra, then it's just your own opinion. So every realization we have has to be rooted in Shastra. On the flip side, he was mentioning that if we just speak from Shastra, but we don't have personal experience of realization of it, then that's good, but better is if we have an experience that we can relate to the Shastra. That's the strongest. When we have a personal experience or realization, that is connected to the Shastra. That's the best. So we have to accept the ruling of the Shastra, and then gradually we'll realize the points in the Shastra. Oh, now I understand purity. I've been practicing for 10, 15 years, and now I'm starting to get it, what purity actually means. So we have to have faith in the Shastra. We can't manufacture our own method. And also in the purport, Prabhupada has a very strong statement, which is If we simply make a show of offering services to the deity, but do not care for Seva Aparad, certainly the Radha Krishna deity will not accept offerings from such non-devotees. He uses the word non-devotees. So he's pulling us up straight. In other words, he's saying, Prabhupada's saying to us, if you're not attentive in your service, if you're not trying your best, then if you're being a bit lax, then you may be slipping into the category of being a non-devotee. So that's a very interesting point. So Prabhupada's showing his love for Krishna here. He's saying that he wants the best for Krishna, and we shouldn't be lackadaisical and whimsical in our service to the deity. And also interesting to note in this connection is the 11th canto, how it evaluates devotees. We have the first level devotee, beginning level devotee, which is actually, for Kali Yuga, it's quite a high platform. Someone who's very attached to worshipping the deity. That's actually in Kali Yuga, that's actually a neophyte devotee is a very high platform in Kali Yuga. Someone who's very attached and faithfully worships the deity. They're following all the rules and regulations, but unfortunately they don't respect or properly interact with other devotees or the people in general. So actually that's it's actually a glorious position to be a Kanishta Adhikari in Kali Yuga. But of course, we want to progress from that. We want to become to the next platform, Madhyama Adhikari, where, yes, we are loving the Lord and performing our service nicely, following all the rules and regulations, but we're also making friendships with the devotees and those who are not familiar with the process of Krishna consciousness. We're trying to help them progress in Krishna consciousness, whether it's giving them prasadam, giving them a book, just being their friend, whatever it may be, somehow or other trying to help them make progress. And that means you love Krishna more, because you're not just doing your deity worship nicely, but you're loving all Krishna's parts and parcels too. All the people that come to visit the temple, you're also respecting and offering nice words and helping them in their service to Krishna as well. So there's a few more things I wanted to speak on, but I don't know how we're doing for time. How long should I go? Should we stop for questions?
So probably there's still time. If you like, you can continue, no problem. But if you
Okay,
stop, it's fine. It is
okay.
up to you.
Thank you, Prabhu. Yeah, I've just got a couple more things I want to mention. So we may ask the question, or someone may ask you, and we may not have a full answer for it. We may just have faith, but better than just having faith is also having a logical explanation. Many people can appreciate that. People often aren't into belief or faith. They want some logical reasoning. So one may ask, why do we worship the deity? We may ask ourselves, someone may ask us. And also, as a devotee, we may be thinking, well, isn't the holy name the Yuga Dharma? Deity worship was for Dwapara Yuga. Why are we doing it now? Well, I know for myself, to perform the Yuga Dharma, just to sit and chant Hare Krishna is very challenging. I can see the mind's restless in many different ways. It wants to see things, it wants to smell things, it wants to taste things, etc. And deity worship covers all these aspects. Deity worship is wonderful because it utilizes all the senses in the Lord's service. It's full engagement for all the senses in the service of the Lord. If you go through those lists that I was mentioning earlier, in chapter 6, how to discharge devotional service, in chapter 7, etc., and you look at each of the items, you'll notice that each of these different items are engaging different senses. So the 64 items in deity worship that we're given in Nectar of Devotion, they're full engagement for all the senses in the Lord's service. So that's one reason why deity worship is very wonderful. The holy name is engaging fewer senses. It's not, I mean, if you're chanting Shuddhanam, I'm sure you can smell Krishna, and I'm sure you can taste them on your tongue. But for myself, where I'm at, I'm not quite getting that experience. So deity worship is wonderful in that regard. We can taste the Lord's prasadam, we can smell the incense, we can see the beautiful form of the Lord. So that's one reason why deity worship is there. Secondly, to chant the holy name properly, one must be pure. So to purify the materialistic tendencies of a conditioned soul, deity worship is the perfect remedy, as it requires the high standards of cleanliness and purity that one needs to chant the holy name properly. So I'll just bring up something from Chaitanya Charitamrita here. So this is from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, chapter 15. I believe it's, yes, text 108. Auspicious number text 108. And this is from Jiva Goswami. Srila Jiva Goswami, in his Bhakti Sandarbha, he describes the importance of deity worship as follows. So this is the direct quote from Chaitanya Charitamrita. This is why deity worship is there, although it's Kali Yuga and seemingly it shouldn't be necessary. Quote, it is Srimad Bhagavatam's opinion that the process of deity worship is not actually necessary, just as the specific prescriptions of the Pancharatra and other scriptures do not have to be followed. The Bhagavatam enjoins that even without practicing deity worship, one can achieve the complete success of human life by any of the other devotional processes, such as simply offering oneself at the Lord's feet for his protection. Nonetheless, Vaishnavas following the path of Sri Narada and his successors endeavor to establish a personal relationship with the Lord by receiving the grace of a bona fide spiritual master through initiation. And in this tradition, the devotees are obliged at the time of initiation to begin engaging in deity worship. Although deity worship is not essential, the material conditioning of most candidates for devotional service requires that they engage in this activity. When we consider their bodily and mental conditions, we find that the character of such candidates is impure and their minds are agitated. Therefore, to rectify this material conditioning, the great sage Narada and others have at different times recommended various kinds of regulations for deity worship. So that's the more shastric answer as to why we worship the deity. So that's from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, chapter 15, text 108. I'm sure it's mentioned in other places, like the 7th canto, there'll be some details there, but that's quite a strong statement by our Shastra Acharya, you could say, Jiva Goswami. So I'll finish there. I'll just quickly recap. So we discussed the different aparads. There's so many different types of aparads, but if we just know the 10 offenses to the holy name, that's a pretty safe place to cover our knowledge of offenses. The Nectar of Devotion is a wonderful book which explains all the devotional principles and has the list of offenses to be avoided in deity worship and to the holy name. The acronym ABCDD, if we want to remember the 5 potent limbs of devotional service. How cleanliness and punctuality are quite crucial in deity worship. It's a simple formula for remembering the essence, one could say. And that, of course, our senses and mind aren't so good at judging things, what's pure and what's not. We go by the Shastra. That's the real bedrock of our performance of deity worship. And we want to come to the platform of Madhyama Adhikari. We want to make friendships with the devotees and be merciful to the innocents. So not just love Krishna and give all our heart to him, but also love his parts and parcels. And we concluded with why we do deity worship, the reason it's required or still executed in Kali Yuga, even though seemingly it's not necessary. So thanks everyone for your attention. Is there any questions or comments, corrections from the assembled Vaishnavas?
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Thank you so much for the wonderful class today, and all your statements substantiated with the quotes from the various shastras. It was really ecstatic to hear that. So thank you for sharing your immense knowledge in this. So I just you mentioned regarding this the 3 levels of devotees from the 11th canto. So I just thought came to mind. You mentioned that the Kanishta Adhikari, actually it's a very exalted platform. Very rightly you put it. So it's a very exalted platform to be in. So my question came to mind was, there are different activities, right? In the Kanishta Adhikari, there are different activities like very sincere deity worship, serving the deity. And then for the Madhyam Adhikari, you mentioned making friendships with the relatives, with the devotees, relationships with the other devotees, that kind of activities. So my question is, should a person first attain perfection as a Kanishta Adhikari before even attempting any of the Madhyam Adhikari activities? Or even if he or she is not perfect, he is not a perfect Kanishta Adhikari, that is, he's got a lot of faults, he or she, I've got a lot of faults. So can I even attempt any of the Madhyam Adhikari activities? Or should I first try to become a perfect Kanishta Adhikari? So that a thought came to mind. So I just wanted to ask your advice on that, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, thank you for your kind words. And that's a very nice question. Yeah, it's mentioned by Lord Chaitanya that one should become perfect and then teach others. So one can go, okay, well, I'm not perfect, so I'll do that first. And then our whole life goes by and we're still not perfect and we leave our body and we didn't tell anyone about Krishna. Yeah, I remember reading, I'm trying to remember exactly where it is. I believe it's in Srila Prabhupada Leelamrita, but I could be wrong. But there's the point that's made that in the court of law, before one's allowed to speak in the court of law, one has to be a qualified lawyer and pass the bar exam, etc., and then they can enter the court and act as a lawyer. So that's a long time. You know, they have to study for 5 years and get some training, etc., which may take another couple of years, and then they can go in there and do their thing. And the equivalent position that was given of a brahmana, of being compared with a lawyer, was that Srila Prabhupada was saying in essence that I'm giving you the Brahminical initiation, now you become a brahmana. So in other words, you're given the graduate, here's your certificate, here's your diploma, now come to the standard. So it's a very interesting process we have in Kali Yuga, simultaneous transformation and distribution. I mean, I've got a Brahmin thread and I'm in no way, shape or form a real Brahmana. So it's a very interesting process that we're given. Simultaneous transformation and distribution. So we can perform even a brand new devotee, actually even a child, Sarasvati, the daughter of
Shamsundar Prabhu.
Yes, Shyamasundar Prabhu and Malati, Devi Dasi, her grace. She was acting as a Madhyama Adhikari. She would go up to someone and say, do you know who Krishna is? And this stranger would say no. And she would say, Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead. So, of course, you could say, okay, she's a child, so the rules and regulations don't apply to her. And that's fair enough. And similarly, actually, speaking for myself, I'm also a child in devotional service, but the instruction is there by Lord Chaitanya. And this is another point that His Grace Radhika Raman Prabhu mentioned in his talk on how to give a class or a presentation to different audiences speaking about Krishna. If for any of you who joined late, I recommend listening to that series by His Grace Radhika Raman Prabhu in ISKCON Silicon Valley this year. So he mentioned this point that actually we can act as a Madhyama Adhikari because it's Lord Chaitanya's order. Yari Deka Tarakaha Krishna Upadesh. That's his order. Everyone gets that order. No one is excluded from it. It's interesting. If you read Chaitanya Charitamrita scrutinizingly, you'll see that that's not the only place that that's mentioned. That particular point or idea is mentioned several places throughout the Chaitanya Charitamrita. I think I've found at least 4 other instances of a similar verse within the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So it's everyone's duty, actually. So it's a Majjhima Adhikari activity to preach, but because it's Kali Yuga and because Lord Chaitanya has given the order, the mandate, he's basically saying, okay, I know you're whatever you are, you may not even be a Kanishta Adhikari, but still do a Majjhima Adhikari activity. And actually by performing that activity, it will help us come to that platform because Lord Chaitanya will give us some empowerment. But of course, that's not to say that we should neglect the rules and regulations and we shouldn't try to become perfect and we shouldn't work on all the things that we need to work on to come to the perfect point. Because if we actually are fully, properly a Majjhima Adhikari and we perform the Majjhima Adhikari activity, we'll be very, very potent in that activity. Very, very potent. So whatever level we're at, we can still perform these activities. But of course, yes, it is best to start with the basics. One shouldn't try to play double time on the mridanga until one's learned how to play mid-tempo or something. So we may not run out the door and try to preach to everyone we meet. We may just, focus on learning how to offer prasadam to Krishna first. But even new bhaktas, they can do wonderful preaching. It's incredible, actually. New bhaktas, they're not initiated. They don't know about the offenses. They can do some really empowered preaching, actually. And this is Lord Chaitanya's grace and mercy. So that's, I guess, in the sum and substance of my answer to your question is that, yes, we try to become a Kanishta Adhikari. We try to become a Majjhima Adhikari. We try to go through the stages. But ultimately, we're fully dependent on Lord Chaitanya's mercy and the instructions of our spiritual master. It's Kali Yuga. We're mercy cases. Some may be less mercy cases than others. Some may have been sent here from Vaikuntha realm to get things going and to help Srila Prabhupada in his movement. And of course, Srila Prabhupada himself was sent here. So there may be those special people. But generally speaking, Kali Yuga requires a lot of mercy. And that's why Lord Chaitanya incarnated in Kali Yuga, because this is the Yuga that we need the mercy. So I hope that wasn't too roundabout of an answer. It was clear enough.
No, it's very, very, very clear. Thank you for the kind and encouraging answer. Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Thanks for your question. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandavat Pranam. What a beautiful tips you have just supplied today. It's very, very essential for all of us to be in this line. The point you mentioned is really, really nice. Very helpful points. That reminds us every moment when you do some activity, whether it is in full fledged or halfway, it should be done with great attention and care, with great respect. Those points really pinpointed very nicely by you. Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Thank you for your kind words, Prabhu. I'm sure you could speak at much greater length, which with much more realization than myself. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, Prabhu, for your kind lecture, and particularly you have clarified very well regarding the word cleanliness and purity. And sometimes physical cleanliness is often not accompanied with purity, and most of the people, I mean, people outside this Krishna conscious movement are often not very clear about their understanding what is purity, because they think cleanliness is purity. But you have very nicely pointed out, of course, those who are in the movement knows it, but for most of the other people outside in particular, they have very little knowledge about what is cleanliness and what is purity, because what is not acceptable by Krishna is not pure. We have to understand it as against physical cleanliness, often done by other people. They think that even taking non-vegetarian things is all right. And similarly, you have told about the punctuality in the service of the deity worship. And that is also an essential part of deities, that we cannot do it according to our whims. It is to be regulated by Shastra, and what is mentioned in the Shastra. That is very important. Otherwise, each of us will make their own individual way of worshipping the Lord, and that makes a very whimsical situation for everybody. But it is always to be supported by Shastra, whatever we are doing. So thank you for that, and also about your clarification about the last point, the question raised by Madhav Prabhu, that even one is in a Kanishta stage, he can also preach, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has permitted that. And I remember another sloka is there in the Chaitanya Charitamrita also, Amar Agai Guru Hoya Taroi Desh, and I am giving you the permission. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has permitted us to preach, irrespective of our position, provided we are preaching it in the proper spirit, for the service of Krishna, and not for personal vendetta. So long we do that, and for the service of Krishna, we are in the right direction. So I think that is all what I have learned from your lecture. Prabhuji, thank you for your class today.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. I'd like to hear from all of you and speak on this, because I myself am not engaged in so much deity worship. So I'm sure all of you have a lot more realization than what I can theoretically speak on. Hare Krishna.
But Prabhuji, you have very nicely told about it. What you have told shows no difference between an experienced person and what you have told. There will not be much difference in it, but you have rightly told everything very correctly.
Thank you. Shall we end there?
Is there anybody to make any further comments on all that, or otherwise we can close the class?
Okay. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki.
Jai.
Prabhupada ki.
Jai.
Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki.
Jai.
Sanita Gaur Premanande.
Vansha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindubhya
Patnam
patitanam pavanebhyo